All rise. Veuillez vous lever. The International Criminal Court is now in session. L'audience de la Cour pénale internationale est ouverte. Please be seated. Veuillez vous asseoir.
Good morning, everyone. Court officer, please call the case.
Good morning, Mr. President, Your Honors. Situation in the Central African Republic 2 in the case of the prosecutor versus Alfred Yekatom and Patrice Edouard Ngaissona, case reference ICC 0114-0118, and for the record, we are in open session.
Thank you very much. I ask for the appearance of the parties. We start with the prosecution.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Président, Madame, Messieurs les juges. Aujourd'hui, le bureau du procureur est représenté par moi-même, le procureur adjoint Mammandia Ignan, et j'ai à mes côtés le procureur Kweku Van der Puy, Madame Olivia Struven. Derrière moi, Lucio Garcia, Madame Maria Berdenikova, ici Pierre Belbenoit-Avich, Madame Sylvie Vakchom, Madame Manochitra Prataban et Monsieur Yassine Mustafa. Et j'en profite bien entendu pour dire bonjour à la défense et à la représentation des victimes. Merci.
Thank you very much. We turn to the representative of the victims, Ms. Masida first.
Good morning, Mr. President, Your Honors. For the victims of the other crime appearing today, Ms. Elizabeth Rabesanatana, Ms. Marie-Edith Duzima Lawson, Mr. Abdou Dangabo Moussa, Mr. Yaref Fall. On the second row, the other bench of a legal representative, Mr. Innocent Mpoko, field counsel, and then the legal officers who helped us throughout the trial, Ms. Mouya Asso, Ms. Eveline Ombeni, Mr. Enrique Carnero Rojo, Mr. Alexis Larivière, Mr. Orcholon Aransetser, Ms. Ejin Kim, and myself, Paulina Masida.
Indeed, not to forget yourself, that's right. We turn now to Mr. Saproun.
Good morning, Mr. President. Good morning, Your Honors. The formal child soldiers are represented today by Amina Merouche, Joseph Akem Mebungu, and myself, Dmitro Sopron. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we are turning to the defense. We start with the defense of Mr. Yekatom. Ms. Dimitri, please.
Good morning, Mr. President. Good morning, Your Honors. Good morning, everyone in the courtroom. Mr. Yekatom is present this morning behind us, and he's represented from my right-hand side, Ms. Anta Gisse, Ms. Sarah Bafadel. On the row behind me, Ms. Yusra Lamkadam, Mr. Florent Pages-Granier, Mr. Guillaume Suzuki. On the far left, Ms. Alexandra Breer, Ms. Sabrine Baysat, Ms. Léa Benoit, and myself, Milan Dimitri.
Thank you very much. And now the defense of Mr. Ngaissona.
Good morning, Mr. President, Your Honors. Good morning, everyone in the courtroom. Mr. Ngaissona is today represented by Ms. Laurel van der Leer. On my right side, Ms. Marie Librou. Second row, Alexander Desdavi, Despina Eleftheriou, Chiara Giudici, and on my left side, Ms. Milesse Beaulieu and Lou Crignon, and myself. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we start first with the closing arguments by the Office of the Prosecution. I give you the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, Madame, Messieurs les juges. Les arguments, la plaidoirie du bureau du procureur sera présentée par l'équipe à laquelle vous êtes déjà très habitués, qui a été avec vous depuis le départ. Mais j'ai tenu quand même à venir pour vous présenter le respect du bureau. Le procureur lui-même aurait souhaité être là s'il en avait la possibilité. Donc pour ce procès long qui a requis l'attention de tout le monde depuis un certain temps. C'est pourquoi je tenais à venir, mais l'essentiel de notre argumentaire sera développé par notre équipe conduite par M. Kweku. Mais je tenais aussi à venir ici pour vous dire quelques mots. Monsieur le Président, Madame, Messieurs les juges, ce jour où nous présentons nos réquisitions finales dans le procès de Patrice Edouard Ngaissona et Alfred Yekatom, qui pour nous est une date extrêmement importante pour la justice, et cette justice qui est attendue depuis si longtemps en République centrafricaine. Vous l'avez tous entendu que les roues de la justice tournent très lentement, mais ces roues, en fait, comme on l'a vécu aujourd'hui, cette roue tourne quand même. Et c'est peut-être long à venir, mais cela vient, et aujourd'hui, ce que nous vivons en est l'illustration. L'achèvement de ce procès est un grand succès pour cette institution. Il confirme non seulement la détermination du bureau du procureur à lutter contre l'impunité en République centrafricaine, mais aussi, en fait, cette détermination, elle est partagée par la Cour dans toutes ses composantes. Je dis bien dans toutes ses composantes. Et donc cet achèvement démontre aussi notre engagement à rendre justice aux milliers de victimes des crimes de masse et des atrocités perpétrées en République centrafricaine depuis août 2012 dans le contexte de cette situation. Et je voudrais encore une fois dire ici que la décision qui a été prise par le bureau du procureur de clore les enquêtes après un certain nombre d'affaires identifiées et poursuivies, que cette décision n'a jamais été pour nous un abandon. Notre équipe, au contraire, s'est toujours engagée dans cette quête de vérité. Et il s'agit, en l'occurrence dans cette affaire, de crimes très graves qui ont causé des préjudices énormes à de nombreuses victimes et aux communautés en République centrafricaine. Et pour nous, l'impunité n'est pas une option. Elle l'est encore moins dans cette affaire, où les preuves présentées au cours de ce procès établissent la culpabilité des deux accusés pour les crimes qui leur ont été reprochés. Et cela, nous l'avons déjà largement développé dans nos conclusions écrites, dans notre mémoire de clôture, et vous allez également l'entendre à nouveau dans le résumé de ces preuves qui vous sera présenté. Monsieur le Président, Madame, Messieurs les juges, j'aimerais bien rappeler à nouveau le préambule du statut de Rome qui indique, et je cite, « Les crimes les plus graves qui préoccupent la communauté internationale dans son ensemble ne doivent pas rester impunis. » Fin de citation. Les crimes commis par les deux accusés doivent être punis, et c'est le sens profond de cette affaire. Le renvoi de cette situation, qui remonte déjà à plus de 10 ans, reposait justement sur l'espoir d'obtenir justice pour des milliers de civils innocents dont la vie a été ruinée, déchirée par une violence inouïe et des atrocités d'une ampleur inimaginable. Malheureusement, la réalité est qu'aujourd'hui, pour beaucoup de ces victimes, les souffrances continuent. Les crimes poursuivis dans ce dossier sont en violation du statut de Rome, comme je l'ai indiqué tout à l'heure, et des normes et coutumes internationales bien établies en matière de droit des conflits armés. Ils transgressent les règles élémentaires de notre humanité et ils choquent les consciences. Et il faut que ceux qui en sont responsables rendent des comptes. Et bien entendu, il faut aussi que la voix des victimes soit entendue. Et cela a été dit déjà lors de l'ouverture de ce procès en 2021, dans le contexte d'un conflit armé qui a secoué la République centrafricaine il a été dit que Patrick Edouard Ngaissona et Alfred Yekatom ont participé à une campagne de violence visant des civils musulmans, dont des enfants, entre septembre 2013 et décembre 2014. La Chambre dispose d'éléments de preuve qui prouvent, au-delà de tout doute raisonnable, que M. Ngaissona a aidé et encouragé ou contribué de toute autre manière à cette campagne de violence anti-Balaka en ce qui concerne 31 chefs de crimes de guerre et de crimes contre l'humanité. De même, la Chambre dispose d'éléments prouvant au-delà de tout doute raisonnable que M. Yekatom a perpétré ou ordonné les 21 chefs d'accusation de crimes de guerre et de crimes contre l'humanité commis par les anti-Balaka et tous ces crimes dont il est accusé. Enfin, je voudrais simplement dire, Monsieur le Président, Madame, Messieurs les juges, que ces preuves requièrent justice. Elles requièrent des comptes. Elles exigent que la Chambre déclare les accusés coupables des faits qui leur sont reprochés. Et je vais m'en arrêter là pour passer la parole à mon collègue M. Kweku Van der Puy. Et je vous remercie de votre attention.
Merci beaucoup. Mr. Van der Puy.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a few logistical arrangements, Mr. President.
No problem. When you have them finished, you can start. Well, the reshuffling seems to have been finished, so yeah, you can start now.
Yes, Mr. President, I have a presentation.
Yeah, I thought so.
Slide.
Yes.
So I think, is that loading up now? I think it's loading up now. Evidence 2. I think I'll get going, and hopefully the presentation will catch up with me. First, thank you, Mr. Deputy. Thank you, Mr. President. It's my privilege to appear before you once again on behalf of the Office of the Prosecutor and my team. I would like to start by thanking the court staff, the registry, interpreters, counsel, and of course my able team in the conduct of these challenging proceedings. And of course, the many witnesses who also appeared and participated in this trial, which was essential. Just briefly, we intend to proceed with our presentation in 6 parts. I will address the context in which the charged crimes were committed and an overview of the accused's involvement. I'll be followed by Ms. Straubin, who will address Mr. Ngaissona's role in that context and his individual criminal responsibility. Mr. Garcia will address Mr. Yekatom's individual criminal responsibility. Mr. Belbenovic will address the 5th December Bangui attack and Mr. Yekatom's role in the crimes committed by his group in Boeing and Qatar. Ms. Wakchom will address the anti-Balaka's crimes in its 5th December attack of Bosangoa and the enclave which lasted there through 2014, April. Ms. Prataban will address the crimes committed at the Yamwar School base in late December 2013. Ms. Berdenikova will address the crimes committed along the PK9 and Baiki axis through February 2014 and the charges concerning the recruitment of children under 15. I will then provide a few concluding remarks, time permitting.
Well, just in time, the presentation seems to have caught up.
Just in time. We'll move to the next slide. In February 2021, in our opening statement, Mr. President, we said that the evidence would establish the accused's criminal responsibility for the charged crimes in this case. As you just heard from Mr. Deputy, these amount to 31 counts of war crimes and crimes against humanity concerning Mr. Ngaissona. And for Mr. Yekatom, they amount to 21 counts of crimes, war crimes and crimes against humanity. The charges are extremely serious. And we're confident that the overwhelming evidence in this case submitted by the prosecution, the nature of which I will come to soon, on that basis we have proved the charges against both accused beyond a reasonable doubt and met our burden. Taken as a whole, the evidence proves beyond any reasonable doubt the accused's criminal participation in and responsibility for the charged crimes, as confirmed by Pretrial Chamber 2 nearly 5 years ago. The charges arise, as you know, from the anti-Balaka's violent campaign against and persecution of the Muslim population in Western CAR, that is the western part of the country. It was a widespread campaign that saw the near total severance of the Muslim community and one involving indiscriminate targeting of Muslim civilians in collective retribution for crimes and atrocities committed by the Seleka. This trial is not a referendum, nor does it fault one side or another in this conflict. And it is certainly not an academic exercise. It is about whether Mr. Ngaissona and Mr. Yekatom bear criminal responsibility for their actions under the Rome Statute, for their participation in the commission of crimes by the anti-Balaka, irrespective of whoever else might also bear responsibility for the commission of crimes. One does not exclude the other. This case is about their conduct, and it's about establishing the truth as proved by the evidence submitted and tested in this court for almost 4 years. A dispassionate and holistic evaluation of that evidence leads to no other reasonable conclusion than the accused's guilt of the crimes as charged. The evidence proved Mr. Ngaissona's criminal responsibility for the anti-Balaka's crimes committed in Bangui and Bosangoa and their aftermaths, and includes those crimes with which Mr. Yekatom is charged, except for his group's recruitment of children under the age of 15. Mr. Ngaissona is charged as an accessory in this case. He aided and abetted the commission of the crimes and otherwise contributed to the anti-Balaka's commission of them in furtherance of its criminal activity, and aware that the anti-Balaka intended to commit the types of retributive crimes charged. Mr. Ngaissona had a choice, whether or not to involve himself with the anti-Balaka in the first place, whether or not to involve himself in their commission of crimes. Any suggestion that he had no choice is fallacious. many people in his position in CAR, if not most, did not join the anti-Balaka. But Mr. Ngaissona did. Not because he was unaware or mistaken of its nature, not because he lacked foresight or common sense. He did because he wanted something out of it, and he wanted power, whether indirectly by returning General Francois Bozizé to the presidency, or directly through seeking that office himself, a position in the transition government, or a lucrative directorship in the SOCASP or ENERCA state companies. The evidence is that Ngaissona chose to lead the anti-Balaka, yet he had the means to just walk away, unlike many. He chose to partake in Bozizé's rhetoric, engendering and instrumentalizing ethnic division and hatred. He chose to involve himself in galvanizing the youth to support Bozizé's failing incumbency, and after he was deposed, to mobilize them along with self-defense groups to the anti-Balaka. He chose to advance the group's practical and ideological objectives. He helped structure it. He helped to facilitate its operations and its capacity by providing money, including for ammunitions and weapons, by liaising and coordinating with key leaders, comm zones, and coordinators such as Maxime Mokom, who was directly involved in the conduct of military operations comprising a part of the widespread attack the anti-Balaka carried out against Muslim civilians from September 2013 throughout December 2014. As the evidence shows, Mr. Ngaissona chose to issue instructions, directions, and orders, including in respect of certain of those attacks. There is no doubt that Mr. Ngaissona knew and recognized that in instrumentalizing fighters filled with vengeance, stoked by inflammatory rhetoric conflating ordinary Muslims, ordinary civilians, with Seleka combatants, that the types of crimes committed in this case were inevitable. By September 2013, the gravity of the crisis in the Central African Republic was profound, and it was known all around. It was discussed repeatedly at the UN, it was discussed at the AU, it was discussed in the EU, it was even discussed in Washington, D.C. Mr. Ngaissona could not but know what was happening in his country, and that the anti-Balaka's crimes were certain to result in the ordinary course of the events. Mr. Ngaissona's longtime associate and anti-Balaka political advisor conceded the following, and I quote, "When the Seleka came and took power, we thought it was just a regular coup d'etat. However, when they took goods from non-Muslims and took them to Muslim neighborhoods, Muslims had to be blamed for this as well, as they protected the Seleka. This is why Muslims, and not just the Seleka, became the target of the anti-Balaka." That's P808, Caro TP 2093010, paragraph 37. Mr. Ngaissona's contributions were made in furtherance of a plan in which he participated with Bozizé, Bernard Mokom, Maxime Mokom, and others to reclaim power in the Central African Republic after the Seleka's 24 March 2013 coup. A plan which, in addition to seeking Jotodia's forcible removal, involved using groups of individuals to fight the Seleka motivated by thirst for vengeance against Muslims collectively, as foreigners, as Seleka supporters, as traitors. This is, at its essence, the anti-Balaka's organizational policy. It was criminal because in the circumstances, it necessarily entailed targeting Muslim civilians in Western CAR who, based on their religion, national, or ethnic affiliation were perceived collectively as collectively responsible for or complicit with and or supportive of the Seleka. It was no secret, and it was one directly related to the anti-Muslim rhetoric, hate speech, and disinformation in which Ngaissona willingly took part and lent his considerable influence to, along with Bozizé, Levi Yakite, Steve Yambete, the members of FROCA and its coordination, KNK members, and others among Bozizé's circle. The Chamber has heard their speeches and read their communications. You've seen Ngaissona's. There is no doubt that he contributed to the Anti-Balaka and to its commission of crimes pursuant to the authorities or report it, and C, actually act on it. In this case, by forwarding it to a member of Bozizé's close protection, one Eric Begalda Danboy, who responds that a report will be made immediately. And you see that at the top of the screen. Ngaissona was not a man of peace, as his defense suggests. He was a leader in the Anti-Balaka long before January 2014, his January 2014 return to Bangui to formally take charge. He said as much to the transition president, and he definitively contributed to their commission of crimes in that capacity. Let me turn to Mr. Yekatom. Mr. Yekatom's responsibility for the crimes committed by his Anti-Balaka group in Boeing, Bangui, and along the PK9 and Baiki axis in the Lobai prefecture is proved beyond a reasonable doubt, as is his responsibility for the recruitment of children under the age of 15 into his Anti-Balaka group. Yekatom, members of his command, and their subordinates participated in a common plan. A common plan involved the commission of violent crimes against Muslim civilians in his areas of responsibility. And that is consistent, moreover, with the broader Anti-Balaka criminal organizational policy or common purpose that I've just described. Like other Anti-Balaka groups, Yekatom's elements were fueled by vengeance and a violent anti-Muslim animus. At a minimum, Yekatom knew, as would anyone applying common sense, that setting such individuals on Muslim civilians would result in exactly the retributive violence against them for which he is responsible. Indeed, it was in executing his orders that his group committed such crimes. And as the evidence shows, he and his commanders even expressly ordered the killing of Muslim men and women, civilians. Yekatom implemented the common plan by committing and ordering the commission of their crimes together with and through his group. He enlisted and structured thousands of elements, 3,000 according to him. He deployed them in operations, including to areas where the Muslim civilian population had already been made vulnerable after the Seleka had fled the Anti-Balaka. He trained them, he armed them, and of course he led his group in furtherance of the Anti-Balaka's widespread attack. Separately or together, his contributions were essential. Mr. Yekatom was feared as an anti-Balaka calm zone, including among the members of his own anti-Balaka group and throughout the Lobai prefecture. His actions lived up to his violent reputation. This is a man who shot 3 of his own elements, killing 2 of them. This is a man who admitted to a fellow calm zone that his group had decapitated a prisoner in their custody because he was a traitor at the Yamwara school. That is a charged incident in this case. The suggestion that Mr. Yekatom strove for peace is very, very far from reality. The reality is that the evidence proves beyond a reasonable doubt Mr. Yekatom's responsibility for the brutal crimes of his group, committed pursuant to their common plan, crimes that were consistent with the Anti-Balaka's criminal organizational policy, and crimes which formed a part of the group's widespread attack against the Muslim civilian population in Western CAR. I'll talk about the policy. The policy underpinning the widespread Anti-Balaka attack was clear. P287 observed, and I quote, "Because they, the Anti-Balaka, make an association between Seleka, Sudanese, Chadians, and foreigners, they would group them all together as their enemy. The perceived enemy simply became Muslims in general." You'll find that at CAR-OTP 2115-0239-R01 at pages 265 through 266. It's actually at paragraph 132. Here's how the Anti-Balaka elements on the ground expressed it in their own words. In the next video sequence you'll notice Rodrigue Momokama, one of Mr. Yekatom's right-hand men, a commander and he's in the video in his trademark long coat and yellow shirt. In the full clip, you will also see others of his commanders, including Habib Bena and Junior Capex.
Pays, c'est notre pays, c'est notre pays, c'est pas le pays des musulmans, c'est pas le pays des musulmans, c'est le pays des Centrafricains. Nous demandons pour quitter notre...
I'll show you another. In Boeing, this is what it sounded like.
C'est un musulman, même si un bébé, bon, je ne peux pas dire, ça m'énerve.
Tu vas pas tuer le bébé quand même?
Moi je tue le bébé.
Mais un bébé de 2 ans par exemple?
Moi je le tue. Mais 1 an, même si avec les femmes avec des grossesses, moi je le tue.
In Boda, the Anti-Balaka member, Brice Kamba, was clear.
C'est impossible, on ne peut pas. Même pour saluer comme ça, on ne peut pas.
Ça c'est pour quoi? C'est pour moi.
C'est pour tuer les musulmans.
Pour tuer les musulmans. On prend comme ça et puis on se coupe ici. Tu veux tuer les musulmans ou pas?
Pardon, si les musulmans veulent partir, on n'a pas de problème avec eux. Mais s'ils ne veulent pas partir, on va les tuer. Même les femmes des musulmans, ils sont tous méchants comme leur mari. Donc, qui était musulman, bébé, bébé musulman, le konoko le sar, dit oko iso babatu le sar.
In a press interview, I believe in March of 2014, an anti-Balaka member from Mandopani put it this way. He said, and I quote, "We cannot accept to live together with Muslims long term." He said, "It's our right to kill Muslims." You see that highlighted for you in the slide in front. That's Ikaro OTP 2001-4633. In the next slide, you'll see a group demonstrating how to kill a Muslim to show international journalists. It's a still frame which you have on the screen in front of you now. While this was just a demonstration, it foretells of a horrifying video of the real thing, a video in evidence depicting the killing and mutilation of the deputy mayor of Mbaiki, Jido Saleh, in which the evidence shows Yekatom's elements took part. In this next clip, the young man you will see expresses what was plain to everyone, and it is at the heart of this case.
Les Arabes doivent quitter. Il faut les Arabes doivent quitter dans la Centrafrique. Ici c'est mon pays. Tous les Arabes. Tous les Arabes, n'importe. Mais sinon, je dois me continuer, tuer même les Arabes, venger.
And then there's this. This is Sylvester Yaguzu. He was a member of the National Coordination.
Nous, les anti-Balaka, c'est moi le porte-parole. Je dis ceci. Je demande à ce fameux président qui se dit Dotoja, il démissionne. Il démissionne. Je lui donne 24 heures. 24 heures, je dis bien, 24 heures qu'il démissionne. Pour sauver, s'il est conscient, s'il démissionne, ça veut dire qu'il a sauvé les centrafricaines musulmanes. Mais s'il, au cas contraire, s'il ne démissionne pas, nous on va faire le massacre. Ça c'est clair.
Clear indeed. These statements and others were made by members of the anti-Balaka who felt justified in saying and doing exactly the types of things which prove the group's criminal policy and underlie its crimes, including those charged in this case. Now, I'd just like to take a moment to address the nature of the evidence presented. The prosecution has tendered over 16,000 items of evidence of the 19,000 submitted in this case. We've presented the evidence of 115 witnesses, 75 of whom appeared before the chamber. The chamber has received contemporaneous video footage, some of which you've seen, audio recordings, photographs, call data records, call sequence tables, expert reports, social media exchanges, emails, open source material, NGO reports, UN reports, sit-reps, press communiques, anti-Balaka documents, mission orders, government records, reports, and intelligence reports. There is a wealth of evidence at this chamber's disposal. You've also received expert testimony, and you've heard from victims of the anti-Balaka crimes in this courtroom who were courageous enough to come and testify. You've also received their prior recorded testimonies. You've also heard from a large number of so-called insider witnesses, and they largely comprise persons closest to the anti-Balaka elements on the ground, as well as those involved in its leadership. The accused implication in the charged crimes does not rest on the evidence of Seleka members. No Seleka member provided evidence in this case. The proof against the accused comes mainly from members of the anti-Balaka itself, the people with whom the accused associated, who they led, who they instructed during the course of the events. The defense protests the evidence of these insider witnesses, and especially those whose evidence was most damning. They suggest that they are cherry-picked or biased against the accused. However contrived the argument, the fact remains that these are the people who were firmly within the accused's orbit. They're the ones who were there. They're the ones who saw. They're the ones who heard. They're the ones who absolutely know what the accused did and absolutely know what the anti-Balaka did. As we foresaw in our opening, some insider witnesses tried to minimize their own responsibility and their involvement to avoid incriminating themselves, to protect others, including the accused, out of loyalty to them or loyalty to the anti-Balaka movement, out of fear or out of pressure or improper contact. P0487 testified, and I'll quote this in French. Les murs ont des oreilles. Même parmi nous ici, il va y avoir des fuites. C'est là où je dis j'ai peur. Et même tout ce que j'ai déjà donné comme détail, ça va coûter quelque chose. Others, such as P1847, nearly succumbed altogether, with the chamber ultimately finding that his failure to testify on material aspects of his prior statements was materially influenced by improper interference. And had it not been for that improper interference, the witness's testimony concerning material aspects of those prior statements would have been substantially different. That is at filing 2126. The insider witness's prior statements confirmed by the witnesses in court overwhelmingly incriminate Ngaissona. If credited, and they should be, they alone are sufficient to sustain his conviction of the charges in this case. But you have far, far more. As we made clear in February 2021, and again underscore today, we have no doubt that as an experienced chamber, you can discern with clarity where these witnesses minimize what they know, where they minimize their involvement with the anti-Balaka, their relationships with the accused, and their link to the group's commission of crime in weighing their evidence. It is not unusual. In your deliberations, it'll be abundantly clear to you that their evidence taken as a whole established the accused's guilt of the charged crimes beyond any reasonable doubt. I'd like to turn to the context. The scope of the evidence covers the period between late 2012 through 2014. As the pretrial chamber confirmed, the charged crimes occurred in the course of the anti-Balaka's widespread attack of the Muslim civilian population in the western part of the country, within the meaning of Article 7 of the statute, between September 2013 and December 2014. Those crimes throughout the country's western provinces took place including in Wam, Mamberikade, Lobai, Wampende, and Mbele Mpoko. As you know, the defenses sought to cast a Seleka coup deposing Bozizé as a foreign invasion. In their opening, that's what they said. It's a transcript 16, page 7, line 28. However, while the Seleka mainly comprised Muslim fighters, emerging in around August 2012 in the north and east of the country, it was led by Central Africans, with Michel Djotodia, who led the UFDR, at the helm. And although it included mercenaries with ties to neighboring countries, most were Central Africans who joined the alliance during its advance. You heard from a witness, in this case, Casper Ager. He testified when asked if it was accurate to say that the Seleka was comprised largely, if not exclusively, of Sudanese and Chadian mercenaries. His response was, "I wouldn't say so. It's still my impression that the majority of the Seleka were Central Africans, both from the beginning until the end." In this article, you can see clearly that the indication is the group started out with 5,000 fighters, but then gradually grew to 20,000 when they captured Bangui. Those 15,000 didn't come from anywhere but the Central African Republic. The several constituent factions which compose the Seleka coalition opposed Bozizé's leadership for many reasons, including his marginalization of the predominantly Muslim regions of the Central African Republic after ousting President Ange Félix Patassé in March 2003. The related crimes were the subject matter of the Bemba trial in this court. In carrying out that coup, Bozizé relied on so-called ex-libérateurs, fighters who later aligned with him as he tried to reclaim power after his own ouster by the Seleka just about 10 years later. Konate, Ngaissona, Dedan, Kudemon, you've heard all those names. One ex-liberateur is sitting right here in the courtroom, and that's Alfred Yekatom. Another, Maxime Mokom, isn't, but you've heard a great deal of evidence about him in this case. After the Seleka took Ndele on the 10th of December 2012, setting the stage for its final advance on Bangui, Bozizé tried to organize a resistance. He gave speeches to drum up support for his failing regime, and you have those in evidence. The speeches portray Muslims as foreigners and sow the seeds for suspicion and ethno-religious division. You have the speeches of Bozizé and his close supporters doing the same thing, such as Steve Yambete, Levi Yakite, whose youth groups were active in and around Bangui. You also have the speeches of Mr. Ngaissona. You will no doubt recall those speeches. And you will have no doubt that he lent himself to the cause through his considerable influence over the youth in the Central African Republic. The anti-Balaka emerged in response to the Seleka's brutal rule. There is no question about it. They committed violence and atrocities throughout their rule. And while the members came from various groups, the anti-Balaka did, including pre-existing self-defense groups, they were united by their hatred for the Seleka and for the violence and devastation that it inflicted. Contrary to the defense's assertions, the anti-Balaka were a clearly identifiable group, not just for that reason, but by an abiding and committed search for retribution against the Seleka, anyone associated with it or perceived to have supported it, and that is the Muslims. They were instrumentalized by Bozizé In the plan, he and members of his inner circle devised to reclaim power, which they elaborated after the 24 March coup from Cameroon, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and France. So along with pre-existing self-defense groups, the Anti-Balaka came to incorporate members of Bozizé's Kwana Kwa party, KNK, members of Bozizé's inner circle, his family, and government, and presidential guard, and the Faka. As well as the two youth groups you can see indicated here, Coac and Kokora. In Cameroon, Bozizé and his inner circle, the Faka, the Presidential Guard, and key figures planned his return to power. Among those involved in developing that plan was Bernard Mokom, Mr. Ngaissona, Louis Ogere Ngaikumo, Levi Yakete, Joaquin Kokate, Steve Yambete. They sought to mobilize support among the youth and CAR in order to enhance the capacity of the Anti-Balaka to carry out military operations to face the Seleka. As the evidence shows, Ngaissona facilitated those efforts. He gave instructions. He kept apprised of developments on the ground in Bangui and coordinated with persons there. In DRC, several ex-Libérateurs and Bozizé loyalists fled to Zongo after the 24 March coup, among them Maxime Moko, who acted as the de facto Anti-Balaka coordinator. He secured money, weapons, and ammunition, organizing the deployment of Anti-Balaka elements and provided instructions on when and where to attack. P446, who was in Zongo with him, described Mokom's central role in coordinating the Anti-Balaka. You have it in the screen in front of you. This is his evidence. Parce que c'est Maxime Mokom qui était le coordinateur des opérations, qui était en perpétuel contact avec les Balaka. C'est Maxime Mokom parce que c'est lui qui coordonne, même ceux qui viennent de l'arrière-pays. C'est Maxime Mokom qui les coordonne. No other person would call and issue orders. It was only him, Maxime Mokom. He was the only one coordinating before the attack of 5th December and after the attack as well. As you know, Mokom would become the Anti-Balaka's national coordinator for operations under Ngaissona. And he remained nearly throughout 2014 in that position. In Zongo, there were also members of Bozizé's former presidential guard, loyalists, and Faka. Some would become key members of the national coordination as well. In Zongo, Yekatom was also there. You'll hear from his own, hear it from his own mouth. Just this moment.
Vous êtes parti où quand Jotodien est arrivé?
Et quand il était venu, j'étais parti en banque pour aller prendre mon salaire et il m'avait arrêté et j'avais pris fuite pour traverser à Zongo. De l'autre côté, ex-Zaïre. Et c'est de là-bas qu'on avait des idées de démarrer notre mouvement par rapport à l'exercice des militaires.
In France, Bozizé assembled his inner circle, including Ngaissona, in late July and early August 2013, where they established the Front pour le retour à l'ordre constitutionnel en Centrafrique, FROCA. The group's founding document, the protocol agreement recovered from Ngaissona's email account, confirms its purpose and his role. Here you can see a copy of it. I know that it's small, and you've seen it before. It contains, among other things, a strategic plan. In that strategic plan, it provides for certain action to be taken, including setting up a flexible coordination capable of fast and efficient strategic action. On the far right of the slide, you can see Ngaissona's designated role in that group, indicating that he is to be le responsable des affaires intérieures et des associations. Your Honors, you've seen the several FROCA communications disseminating anti-Muslim animus and the disinformation, and which fan the flames of ethnic division and hatred of Muslims collectively for the Seleucid crimes. There is no evidence that Ngaissona ever attempted to disown or distance himself from FROCA's actions or its words. Instead, the evidence is that he went about fulfilling his assigned role in the group. And I refer you to CAR OTP 2124, 0002, and 0003. This is an email setting out the roles of FROCA members. FROCA's very existence was to return Bozizé to power by all means. The testimonies of P801, P2625, P1847, and others confirms this, as well as contemporaneous social media records and emails, including those involving Ngaissona and Gaia, P808. These are referenced in our brief. By September 2013, the Anti-Balaka was engaged in organized hostilities against the Seleka in western CAR. In the course of these hostilities, they carried out retributive violent attacks against Muslim civilians. As this next series of slides illustrates, self-defense groups were organized and enlisted beginning in Boar, Bozum, and Bosangor. They were led by Achille Godonam, Dedan Damboy, Richard Bejouan, Amadou Dialé, among others. The border areas were also reinforced. They were reinforced in preparation for the Anti-Balaka's attacks at Garo Balai, Amadagaza, and in Berberati. They were led, among others, by Roka Mokom, Telespo Mokom, Aaron Wilibona, and Chrysostom Yapele, Chiki Chiki, among others. The FACA were mobilized in Cameroon to support operations at the border. From Yaoundé, Bertoua, and Garambulai, Armel Mtenou, a relative of Bozizé, Emmanuel Boya, colonel, Tandor Lamkage, were involved in organizing and leading them. There was also mobilization and coordination in Bangui and in Zongo. Here you can see the key leaders and actors, including Maxime Mokom and Captain Gremangu, Guy Kose. Gremangu was in Boeing, as you may recall. The political military leadership of the Anti-Balaka was also directed, and it was directed from Cameroon and involved many of Bozizé's inner circle and supporters. There you can see Ngaissona, among others. Starting in Bosangoa, the Anti-Balaka's attacks engulfed Buka to the east, spread to the south to Bosentele, Bosimbele, and then Boali. Although disbanded by decree on the 12th of September 2013, ex-Seleka forces continued to engage in hostilities with the Anti-Balaka. These are what the group's attacks looked like in western CAR before the 5th of December. These depict the locations where those attacks occurred. They were of such intensity that they engendered serious trepidation and concern for the country's future among the international community. Laurent Fabius, who was the French foreign minister, voiced his genuine concern at the time. Have a listen.
Des centaines de morts à Bossangoa et à Boire, règlement de compte mortel à Damara, exactions à Bangui.
Aujourd'hui, on s'aperçoit que ce pays est au bord du chaos. Est-ce que la France va intervenir?
Au bord du génocide, même au bord du génocide.
Between the 5th of December 2013 and 14 January 2014, when Ngaissona returned to Bangui, in addition to the anti-Balaka seminal attack on Bangui and its coordinated attack on Bossangoa, the anti-Balaka attacked Beloko, an operation implicating Mr. Ngaissona. Following Jotodia's resignation, the Selikas and the Selikas' retreat to the north and east of the country, and the installation of a new transitional government, the anti-Balaka's violence did not stop. In fact, after Ngaissona's return to Bangui, their attack of the Muslim population in western CAR intensified. And here's what it looked like in blue on the screen in front of you. Boda, Berberati, Gen, Karno, Yaloke, Gaga, Bosentele, all attacked. The Selikas' withdrawal left the Muslim population unprotected and exposed to escalating sectarian violence by the anti-Balaka. In addition to the western provinces, Muslim civilians were targeted in Bangui, Boeing, Bimbo, and along the PK9 and Baiki axis controlled by Yekatom's group. Their targeting involved attacks against the civilian population, summary executions, killings, mutilations, torture, cruel treatment, sexual offenses, destruction of Muslim property and religious buildings, mosques, routine pillaging of Muslim houses and shops, and persecution. By February 2014, nearly all Muslim neighborhoods in Bangui, with the exception of PK5, an enclave to which the anti-Balaka laid siege, had been cleared of their inhabitants. NGOs were struggling there and elsewhere. This next slide is a clip that is shot in Baiki in early 2014.
Tammy's trying to persuade the priest to look after the people in his church. That's if they can even get them there. Without protection from peacekeepers, any Muslims caught passing through Christian areas will most likely be massacred.
Is this case unique?
No. We believe there may now be an estimated 22,000 people that are at risk, that are spread throughout that whole western
And these are
part of the
Muslims?
country. Primarily, yeah.
In March 2014, Bangi's original population of around 130,000 had been reduced to about 900. Most of Western CAR's Muslim population had sought refuge or been evacuated to Chad and Cameroon. By August 2014, some 70,000 Muslim refugees had been received in Chad and over 120,000 in Cameroon. By then, some 20,000, you heard 22,000 in this clip, some 20,000 displaced Muslims were confined in 9 major enclaves in western and central CAR. Bear in mind that the Muslim population in CAR only amounted to around 750,000 people as 15% of the country's total population at that time. It bears reminding that crimes like displacement, forcible transfer, and deportation, and the severe deprivation of liberty committed by the anti-Balaka continued into and throughout 2014, even well beyond. The anti-Balaka was a structured group before and after 2014. The evidence demonstrates that the anti-Balaka was structured and organized even before its formal structuring took place in January 2014, during the course of the ongoing Article 7 attack against the Muslim population. And while its crimes, such as deprivation of liberty and persecution in Bossangoa and Bangui, continued, as well as crimes committed by Mr. Yekatom's group. You've seen several documents demonstrating the formal organization of the group, and I'll just remind you of a few. Here you can see the communication conjointe. It is the initial iteration of the anti-Balaka coordination. Here you can see a déclaration des combattants anti-Balaka, listing several members of the anti-Balaka coordination. This one is from February 2014. You can see here a communiqué de presse, number 7, a similar document also issued by the anti-Balaka in March, I believe this one is, 2014. And now you can see a list of comm zones, and you have the document, you know that there were many indeed, close to 100, if not more. Before January 2014, contrary to the defense position, the anti-Balaka was organized within the meaning of Article 8.2.f. The group's ability to engage the Seleka already by September 2013 alone makes that clear. Moreover, the violence that the anti-Balaka inflicted on the Muslim population was not merely sporadic or isolated, but organized, unrelenting, and protracted. As you know, the conflict warranted several external peace initiatives, such as that at Brazzaville in July 2014, in Nairobi at the end of the year. It attracted the attention of the UN, as I mentioned, and that's reflected in several resolutions and the profound concerns expressed by its officials, such as Adama Dieng and John Ging, and others within the international community regarding its intensity and scale. Those concerns were there because the unrestrained consequences of the anti-Balaka's organizational policy was obvious. That policy was one which Ngaissona helped foster through his several enumerated contributions, and one that Yekatom implemented through his essential contributions to his common plan, which resulted in the crimes that they committed in his area of responsibility. With that, Your Honors, we'll proceed with our further presentations, with your leave.
Of course. Thank you, Mr. van der Poel.
Your Honors, the evidence in this case proves beyond a reasonable doubt that Mr. Ngaissona is criminally responsible for the anti-Balaka crimes committed in its attacks in Bangui and Bosangoa on the 5th of December and their aftermath, including along the PK9 Baiki axis. The evidence has shown that throughout the critical events that transpired during the CAR crisis, Ngaissona sought to regain power for Bozizé, but also, by extension, for him personally. The actions he took to realize this aim over the time were numerous, continuing and varied. Let me start by noting 2 points. First, the evidence rejects the defense's assertion that Ngaissona was not even remotely involved with the anti-Balaka before his return to Bangui on the 14th of January 2014. He plainly was, and criminally so. Second, the evidence equally rejects the defense's suggestion that upon his return, Ngaissona sought to establish peace. To the contrary, Ngaissona impeded international forces and a transitional government from effectively stopping the anti-Balaka's violence. He misled them. He publicly denounced their actions while promoting the anti-Balaka ideological objectives, encouraging its members, and justifying their conduct. Aware of their past crimes, and importantly, all while their attack continued to rage. The evidence is clear. From the moment Bozize's regime was in danger, Ngaissona helped to first mobilize and later structure, finance, and equip the anti-Balaka to reclaim power. Ngaissona was a man of considerable means in CAR. He was influential, a successful businessman, National Football Federation president, and the Minister of Youth. He used his stature not for peace, but to mobilize support. He willingly took part in the disinformation and anti-Muslim rhetoric disseminated by Bozize and those close to him. He then watched the anti-Balaka target the Muslim civilian population until it was virtually gone. Ngaissona intended exactly what he did. He knew and understood the natural and foreseeable consequences of his many actions in respect of the anti-Balaka. He intended them, and they contributed to the commission of the group's crimes. Ngaissona's contributions went to fundamental elements of the anti-Balaka crimes. They affected the subjective aspects of their commission, including the policy of vengeance which fueled the group, as well as the objective aspects, including money, ammunition, weapons, and coordination. In the confirmation hearing, the pretrial chamber held that Ngaissona contributed to the commission of the charged crimes in 4 ways: by taking steps to structure the anti-Balaka, by financing the anti-Balaka, including for the purchase of weapons, by issuing instructions to the anti-Balaka, including in relation to the 5th of December attacks and the attacks preceding it, and by liaising with anti-Balaka members exercising key functions, including Bernard Mokom and Maxime Mokom. Given that these contributions overlap factually, I will address them jointly and chronologically. Let me start with the lead up to the 24th March 2013 Seleka coup. Once the Seleka attacked Ndele on the 10th of December 2012, it became clear to Bozize and to those within his close circle that their days were numbered. They faced an existential threat to their power. It was clear that the Faka would no longer withstand another Seleka offensive, and moreover, foreign support was to no avail. Bozize's only choice was to mobilize the youth so that they would fight and defend his regime. As the Seleka were mainly a Muslim coalition, he resorted to nationalistic appeals, vilifying Muslims, pitting them against what he considered real Central Africans. In truth, the Seleka coalition mostly comprised Central Africans. While the evidence shows that there were foreigner mercenaries enlisted within the group that had links to Chad and Sudan, the Seleka's members and leadership were by and large Central Africans. As the defense indicated in their submissions, Seleka means alliance in Sango, not in a foreign language, but in Sango. On the 27th of December 2012, Bozize delivered a powerful speech to the KNK supporters, the KNK youth, at a rally held at the Place de la République. Contrary to the defense's claim that Bozize did not refer to Muslim in his speech, he did, and his audience understood his message, one that stoked fear of and engendered ethno-religious animus towards Muslims, one that falsely portrayed his political opponents as the product of a foreign Muslim invasion. As you have heard, Bozize's speeches in the lead up to the coup blurred the line between Seleka combatants and Muslims, equating the Seleka with Islam and painting Muslims as foreigners, even those living in CAR for generations, a country they rightly considered was also theirs. Here's what he said on the 27th of December 2012, and I quote in French. Ce sont tous des étrangers. Il n'y a aucun centrafricain parmi eux. Ils ne parlent pas sango, ils ne parlent pas français. He added, soyez vigilants dans les différents quartiers. Surveillez surtout les étrangers qui vivent dans des concessions clôturées. Ils ont l'habitude de cacher des gens dans leurs concessions. Ils attendent le désordre total avant de sortir et de passer à l'action en vue de tuer les gens, de tuer les gens, de tuer les gens. Enquêtez dans les quartiers autour des concessions avec des clôtures, autour des propriétés bâties, clôturées et appartenant à des étrangers. Surveillez ce qui se passe. Bozizé called on the youth to take up arms against the enemy and prepare to die. He said, levez-vous, ne restez pas dans la brousse, sortez, armez-vous d'arcs, de couteaux, de tout ce que vous pouvez utiliser. Dites que vous êtes en colère, que vous êtes prêt à mourir, que vous êtes prêt à mourir, que vous êtes prêt à mourir. Yakite spoke at the rally too, implying that the Muslims were traitors, des Judas. He exhorted support for Bozizé, invoking the refrain, la patrie ou la mort. As you will have seen in the Facebook messages, la patrie ou la mort is a slogan that comes back over and over again. To organize the youth efficiently, two militias linked to the KNK had been formed, Kokora and Koak, led by Yakite and Nyambete respectively, who would both participate, as you know, in the planning of the 5th of December attacks. At the rally, Yakite confirmed the Kokora's youth preparedness to support the regime, committing them to patrolling every district in Bangui and to expand its presence in every single province. In every single province. Contrary to what the defense argues, the rhetoric was shared in every single province. Days later, on 31st December 2013, Bozizé repeated this rhetoric, stating that CAR had become two countries, one belonging to the Janjaweed and the other one to the vrais Centrafricains. Let there be no confusion. Contrary to the defense's submissions, the youth were not mobilized to demonstrate or for a peaceful resistance. They were brought in to fight. As Yakite put it, and I quote in French, c'est pourquoi nous demandons à la jeunesse centrafricaine de ne pas avoir peur. S'il faut mourir, alors il faut mourir pour votre pays, mourir pour la liberté, pour vos petits frères, mourir pour l'avenir de vos enfants, mourir pour l'avenir. The youth were brought in to fight, not just the Seneca, but Muslims, as their presumed supporters, harborers, and accomplices. Ngaissona joined in their efforts. On the 4th of January 2013, he conveyed the message stating that he stated, I'll just read it out. On the 4th of January, he conveyed a message stating that les ennemis de la nation ont décidé de créer des troubles en amenant la charia dans le but d'empêcher les différentes confessions religieuses de vaquer à leurs activités normales. Certaines personnes veulent utiliser l'islamisme pour détruire le pays. Days later, on the 6th of January 2013, Ngaissona asserted that foreigners were coming to kill Central Africans. This is what Ngaissona said. Peuple centrafricain, ces gens qui viennent, ils ne te connaissent pas. Ils ne te diront jamais, tu es mon frère, et comme je suis dans la rébellion, je pourrais t'épargner. Ça, jamais ils ne le feront. Ils viennent en tant qu'étrangers. Ils vont d'abord te tuer. Ce ne sont pas les Centrafricains qui ont fait ces choses-là. Je pense que c'est les étrangers qui s'y mixent au milieu des Centrafricains pour venir revendiquer. C'est eux qui ont détruit tout sur leur passage. In his address, as you will see, Ngaissona also explicitly mentions that he was consulting with members of Kokora, which contradicts the defense's suggestion that he had nothing to do with Kokora. And I refer specifically to CAR OTP 2135 3392 at 3394, line 22. Your Honors, it was a false narrative that Ngaissona was spreading, and Ngaissona knew that. Nevertheless, he continued. In an 11 January 2013 radio interview, Ngaissona thanked his audience for their support to President Bozizé and reiterated again, and I quote in French, La République centrafricaine ne doit pas être envahie par les étrangers. The CAR, Ngaissona said, was their country. He did the same in a message broadcast on 14th of January 2013, praising Bozizé as the Messiah of CAR and affirming his unshakable support for his leadership. The hate speeches, and there were many, were wildly disseminated and discussed in the CAR media to the point that a local newspaper made a comparison with Radio 1000 Collines. The rhetoric left no doubt that Muslims were to be considered foreigners, not real Central Africans. The deliberate conflation of Muslim civilians in the Seleka as foreigners and accomplices was meant to and led to a violence and rage that you can see in the ranks of the Anti-Balaka. Despite Ngaissona Defense's attempt to portray the speeches as legitimate and peaceful, at least 11 witnesses confirmed that Bozizé's speeches, echoed by members of his inner circle, including Ngaissona, were not only aimed at the Seleka, but also understood as collectively targeting Muslims who were perceived to support the Seleka. As the MINUSCA and OHCHR mapping report shows, towards the end of 2012, when Seleka launched its war against the government, Muslims were suspected by pro-Bozizé forces or elements of supporting the Seleka, and they became the targets of serious human rights violations, including extrajudicial executions. In addition, the final months of the Bozizé government saw a sudden surge in hate speech by its acolytes, especially against Muslims and or people of Chadian origin. Ngaissona was one of those acolytes, and he was intelligent enough to know that the rhetoric in which he personally took part would have that effect, the effect of having fundamental human rights violations against the Muslim population. The evidence before you shows that it did. Militias with close ties to Bozizé and the KNK, including Kokora and Coac, armed with machetes and AK-47s, erected barricades and checkpoints throughout Bangui and Bimbo, including in Ngaissona's Boyrab stronghold. Their goal to defend Bozizé's regime encompassed not only stopping the Seleka, but also targeting its perceived supporters. The youth militia's witch hunt in and around Bangui was open and notorious. In several instances, they detained, searched, and arrested Muslims, some of which were never seen again. Their actions were widely covered in the local media at the time. Their conduct was a limited preview of what the Anti-Balaka, once fully established with Ngaissona's assistance, would ultimately do.
I think it would be
yes.
A good idea to have a break now. Break until 11:30, please.
All rise, veuillez vous lever.